How is it possible that we are spending so much time and resources on employee engagement, yet employee engagement scores have never been lower? It's a little bit of a paradox. Right? So how does that make actually any sense? I think the reason for that is because we have been focusing on the effect and not the cause. Right? An engaged workforce is something that you get, but you have to do something before you get that. And a lot of the research that I did for my book, which is what I'm going to share with you today, sort of helps identify and prove what that actually looks like and what that is. Now, there was an interesting study that was done by a psychologist by the name of Thomas Gilovich. I had the pleasure of speaking with him not too long ago, and he did an interesting study where he looked at how is satisfaction impacted over time depending on if you invest money on an experience or if you invest money on a physical good. So, if you invest in something physical, let's say a phone, a house, a car, what happens to your satisfaction over time? Your satisfaction over time starts to go down. But what happens if you invest in an experience over time? Over time, your satisfaction starts to go up. And I thought about that, and I realized that it's very much how we think about our organizations. I fundamentally believe that when you start working for a company, you're not disengaged on day one. I mean, when you start working there, you're excited. You want to make a difference. You want to make an impact. You're genuinely wanting to be there. You are an engaged employee. And something happens over the course of your tenure where you go from being very engaged to dropping down, and your satisfaction starts to decrease. And this is how it is for most organizations around the world. We start up here, and we go down here. So how can we start creating organizations where we start up here and we go up? That to me is this whole concept of employee experience and what employee experience actually is. So to try to understand what's going on here with this concept of employee engagement, I started to wonder, did we get everything all wrong? For the past few decades, have we been wrong about employee engagement? Have we been wrong to invest billions of dollars? Have we been wrong to deploy these surveys and to do all these analyses inside of our organizations? Did we make a mistake? So to try to understand that, I did quite a bit of research over the past few years. The first thing that I did is I interviewed around 150, 160 senior level executives at global organizations. These are chief talent officers, chief people officers, innovation officers, some CEOs, people that are in various fields, senior level executives. I also interviewed a lot of employees. And when I was speaking with these executives, I would consistently notice that when they would talk about their organizations and when they would talk about employee experience, it tended to get bucketed into one of three things. And I'll share what those three things are in just a minute. So once I knew what these kind of three buckets were that executives kept talking about, the next thing was to identify what do employees care about most in each one of those three buckets. So I went through around 150 research articles, studies, case studies, and tried to understand what do employees care about most in each bucket. And once I had that, I then created a series of questions that I can then use to evaluate organizations based on these three buckets and based on their overall employee experience. And then I went out to 252 organizations. I hired a team of 5 researchers, 2 data scientists, and we looked at publicly available data and information for 252 global organizations. These are the Fortune 100 best places to work, the Fortune 100, and then a bunch of other organizations that I was personally interested in and wanted to learn more about. So we did all of this data and all this collection on these 250 global organizations. And one really interesting thing that came up is that employee engagement, employee experience are not the same thing.
Do you want to hear something really crazy? 96% of the people who watch videos on this channel are not subscribed. Help me change that number around by subscribing so that you can get access to more videos just like this one. And now, let's get back to the content.
When most people think of employee engagement, now whether this was the intended consequence of employee engagement or not is a whole other question, but most people, when it comes to employee engagement, they use it as a short-term adrenaline shot, as a boost, as a short-term fix to improve morale or to improve satisfaction. So typically what happens is people start working at a company, the organization does some kind of an employee engagement survey, and they look at us and they say, holy crap, look at our scores. Hey, HR guys, come over here. They hand the employee engagement survey to HR and they say, fix that. Our score is a 65, I want it to be an 86. And HR goes, okay. And so what do? They start to think of these little short-term programs and things that they can invest in. We're going to give free food on Wednesdays. Good idea. We're going to let people work from home on Fridays. Okay, perfect. Maybe that will help improve our employee engagement scores. And slowly but surely it does. And so what happens? The scores go up a little bit. And then as time goes on, the scores go back down. And then the company does another employee engagement survey, and they say, oh my God, our scores are down. We've got to do something else. And they do something else, and the scores go back up, and they go back down. And so what happens is you sort of get this little wave where you never actually go up, right? You never cross a certain threshold. You're always down, and then at a point, down, back at that same point, back down again. And that's what happens in many organizations around the world. I spoke with a chief human resource officer at big global organizations not too long ago, and she was very candid with me in how she can manipulate employee engagement in her organization. I was fascinated by this, and I said, please tell me. And she said, simple. If anybody wants a 10-point boost in employee engagement, here's all you got to do. The first time you measure your employee engagement score, do it on a cloudy, rainy, miserable day. The next time you measure employee engagement, do it when it's gorgeous outside. 10-point boost. Problem solved, right? HR is wonderful. We got a 10-point boost in employee engagement surveys. And that really kind of struck a chord with me because I was like, wow, well, clearly something is going on here. And so after analyzing these companies, I realized that employee experience is what happens before you get an engaged workforce. You invest in the experience of your people, they become engaged, and from that employee engagement, you get some kind of business outcomes, or some sort of business results. So what's the difference between engagement and experience? Employee experience is the actual redesign of your organization. Employee experience is what you actually do to redesign your company, to put people at the middle. It's not so much about just doing short-term fixes and short-term solutions. And this is what we're starting to see now, is organizations are finally at that point where they're able to go beyond employee engagement and focus on this kind of redesign of their organizations. Now, the way that we got to this point is actually quite interesting, because when you think about kind of the history of employee engagement and this investment in people, we started off with this utility era. Right? Decades ago, when you went to go work for an organization, you were simply given a hammer and nails. Right? Or you were given a cubicle, a desk, a phone, and you were told, go do your job. That's it. That's all you get. There was no emphasis on employee health and well-being. You want to bring your dog to work? Give me a freaking break. Right? You want free food? Who are you kidding? Work from home? You're nuts. Just shut up, do your job. I gave you the tools that you need. That's it. That was where most organizations have started. From the utility era, we graduated to the productivity era. So after we gave employees these kind of bare bones tools to get their jobs done, we said, all right, now that you got the tools, we're going to figure out how we can make you work harder and faster. And this is where folks like Frederick Winslow Taylor, the founder pioneer of scientific management, came into play. And this is the era where employees were literally timed with stopwatches to shave seconds off of their task. Now imagine today you show up to work and you're sitting at your computer and you just got somebody behind you going, oh, it took you 30 seconds to do that email, huh? Why don't you see if you can do it in 28? Right? That's essentially what was going on. Employees were literally timed with stopwatches to shave seconds off of the work that they were doing. And then we moved on from that. We said, okay, we're done with utility. We've moved on from productivity. The next one is the era of enlightenment, engagement. This is where we try to genuinely understand our people, where we try to make them happy. Right? What can we do to make all of our people happy? And this is where the investment in employee engagement came in. Right? We finally took a step back and realized, well, you know, maybe we're sucking the life out of our people. Why don't we see if we can do something for them? Right? Why don't we see if we can do something for them? And this is why employee engagement came to be. Right? We started investing in flexible work programs. We started investing in corporate culture, have a sense of purpose. Right? Everybody had, you know, whatever the hell that means. Everybody wants to have a sense of purpose. And we started to see this investment in how do we make people happy. And then now, we're finally at that era where we are thinking, okay, we need to take a step back and genuinely rethink how our organizations are designed, how they are constructed. From the 252 companies that I analyzed, there were 15 companies, 6%, that are doing an awesome job investing in employee experience. Very small amount. And I'll explain exactly what those buckets were. But employee experience is essentially, employees have needs and expectations and wants. The organization is designing things that it thinks employees want. So there needs to be an overlap between what the employee expectations, needs, and wants are versus what the organization is actually doing. That overlap between those two things is where employee experience happens. I don't know if I'm sure you've all experienced this, right? When you talk to a spouse, when you talk to a significant other, you might say or do something and have certain intentions, and the person that you do that for doesn't take it that way, right? That happens all the time. You say something, you do something, and your intended perceived experience that you want the other person to get isn't how they feel. Maybe you accidentally insulted them. Maybe you accidentally made them feel bad. This is what happens all the time inside of companies. So organizations have to shift from this mentality of we're going to design things for you to we're going to design things with you. So the overlap between employee needs and expectations and wants and what the organization actually does, that overlap is where employee experience happens. And this is why today we're starting to see so many new roles and titles emerge. Chief Employee Experience Officer, Head of Employee Experience. Airbnb has a global head of employee experience. BMC Software has a chief employee experience officer. These are new titles and roles that are emerging. So it's a very exciting time to see these types of initiatives happen. Now, some of these top organizations are ones that you would expect. Right? So from the 15 companies, Facebook, Google, LinkedIn, Accenture, Microsoft, Cisco, these were some of the organizations that scored highest on that list of employee experience. And these are organizations that I call the experiential companies. They're the experiential companies just because they do such a great job at investing in employee experience. Now, the interesting thing is that employee experience is something that is relevant for any company. Small, medium, large, technology industry, finance industry, pharma industry, it doesn't matter. Right? Every organization around the world is starting to make these investments in employee experience. And meeting planners and business professionals such as yourselves are also very much in the employee experience game. You create experiences for the people that are there. So this is something that every person, every organization around the world needs to pay attention to and something that they all care about. This isn't just an organizational thing. This is something that everyone does. So why is this investment actually happening? Why are we starting to see these investments in employee experience? There are some interesting trends that are causing this shift inside of our companies. And some of these trends are ones that you would expect to hear about, millennials and changing demographics, we all hear about that stuff. But there are some other broader trends that are impacting our organizations. The first one is transparency. Right? Today, you can go onto a website like Glassdoor, and before speaking with anybody at the organization, you can know everything about what it's like to work there. You can know what the corporate culture is like. You can know the questions that you'll be asked on the interview. You can know about the salary that you're going to get. You will know everything about working there. So this whole era of transparency is really not allowing organizations to not invest in their people. So in other words, if you have a place where people don't enjoy working, other people will know about it. And because other people will know about it, you're going to have a very hard time attracting and retaining top talent. So this whole era of transparency is a fascinating one to pay attention to. Because years ago, this wasn't possible, right? Years ago, if you didn't like your job, what are you going to do? Tell your friend? Tell your mom? Today, what happens if you don't like your job? You'll tweet about it. You'll write an article about it. You'll put up a review on Glassdoor. Everybody else is going to see it. And this now becomes a big thing. So this whole era of transparency is one that's very exciting and one that's very interesting and forcing organizations to change.